everybody. Frenemies of the people. I'm Dennis. That's Patrick. That's Eleni. We're back again. We do not take any funds from the corporation from public broadcasting, so please don't cancel us. And we are sponsored by the off-season package at the Naperville Swimming Hole. So let's get to it. One of the things we're going to talk about politics in Chicago and Illinois. You need to be able to talk about the federal courthouse. And I think this is where producer Grace would insert the Law and Order sound, which is one of my favorites. But anyway, Senator Emil Jones III recently was deadlocked in his corruption trial. The jury was deadlocked, rather. And so there was no conviction, and the new U.S. attorney and his team are considering what their options are there. Just viewing it from, 50,000 square feet above sea level, to mix a bunch of metaphors, it didn't seem like the most egregious case of corruption, but I think we take a lot of pride in Chicago and Illinois in our corruption, so we expect, some really serious stuff. So there's that. But there's also a decision they have to make in federal court regarding the retrial of the former president of AT&T, and I will butcher the poor man's name, Paul Lascaza, who also had a jury that was deadlocked over corruption charges related to the Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan. For our global viewers, it really does take a scorecard, like who's indicted, who's not, who's beat the rap, who's never been convicted, who's got convictions. But at this moment, Speaker Madigan is due to be sentenced. The federal government needs to figure out whether to retry the CEO or the president of AT&T, who was had some corruption allegations related to do-nothing payments for a longtime politico associated with Speaker Madigan. That was also the one area in Madigan's conviction that didn't hold up. So a lot going on, but the bottom line is we've got two major cases where the juries in the Northern District of Illinois said, we can't really figure out a way to convict these individuals on corruption. And I'll just posit a theory and throw it out to you two. We draw for jurors in federal court from the entire Northern District of Illinois. It's not just Chicago. So we've got some of the exurbs and the suburbs, and a very experienced white-collar lawyer that I was talking with recently told me that he thinks that there's a little bit of, some folks from some pockets of Chicagoland who look at some of these corruption cases with a whole new, more jaundiced eye, having seen that our President of the United States beat back a number of charges and cases. What do you think? Is there jury nullification of corruption charges going on now?
So, I think that right now, what's been happening in federal court is slightly concerning. Not because we don't want justice to be served, but as you said, we pride ourselves in Illinois on the level of our corruption. And, some of these entities that are in federal court have been accused of doing some serious things, but then some have not. And I think there's a question right now about the strategy of the U.S. Attorney's Office and how they're targeting some of these folks. That is ultimately resulting in some of these acquittals. And I think that then causes damage to this fighting of corruption that we hope our elected officials are doing, right? They want to clear out corruption, but then to have the U.S. Attorney's Office not necessarily using the usual strategies that are resulting in these acquittals is just, it's not ultimately helping the cause of targeting corruption. So I just think there's a little bit of a question right now as to more, in my opinion, the strategy of the U.S. Attorney's Office and how they are targeting corruption cases right now in Illinois.
Patrick, what do you think?
I think over time we've seen a lot of these corruption cases, both nationally and then here in Illinois. It's getting much harder for folks to believe, I think, just on its face, this is a clear case of corruption, right? Politics can be detestable, things can be unseemly. That's been true since the founding of our country. Maybe, we pride ourselves on some entertaining cases of people that are hard to nab, but, we don't have the senator with the gold bars in his jacket. That's really easy to follow. Where did the gold bar
I think
come
New
from?
Jersey really beat us. New Jersey really kicked our butt on that.
Where did the gold bar come from and how did it get there is one thing to explain or attempt to explain. The other is some of these other ones are just a little bit more questionable. And then jurors are influenced. We are all influenced. Media is influenced by everything we see every day. And so if everything is a scandal, nothing is a scandal. And so some of these things maybe 15, 20 years ago would be a scandal. Now it's like, well, that's just kind of par for the course. I'm trying to understand how this is different than what I heard about or was alleged a few years ago. I mean, I still, it's remarkable to think that a plagiarism scandal did Joe Biden's presidential run in. And now it's like, that wouldn't even matter because you would just ask ChatGPT to write your speech for you. Is the same evolution of what is criminality and politics in a corruption case and what can be proven in court changing? I think it's just making it more difficult, as Eleni said, for the prosecutors to get rid of the bad actors, and the bad actors are getting smarter about how to avoid maybe not detection, because I think everybody can understand there's still those forces, but maybe they're getting better at avoiding conviction.
Just a quick disclaimer. Love the U.S. Attorney's Office. Everyone's doing a great job there. So
yes, 100%.
There.
Yeah. We are behind them 1,000%. And that is why we are all dressed like we're going to court today, which is also kind of funny. So if you're listening, federal government, A+, we're with you. Speaking of A+, Governor J.B. Pritzker seems to increasingly be readying himself for a run for president. And he's had a few comments recently, including showing up on a late night talk show, Jimmy Kimmel, where he maybe indicated he might not run for re-election as governor. But at any rate, whether he's a presidential candidate officially or not, or whether he's a candidate for re-election or not, by virtue of the fact that he's looking into these options, he's drawing some fire. And we're seeing some, uncharacteristically, because that is an organization, an administration that is pretty locked down in terms of media leaks and backbiting and enforcing some unity in the party, at least from my big picture view. Eleni, it seems like there's some skirmishes going on among Illinois Democrats.
I think the Durbin announcement has continued to make waves within the party. And as we said last week, this seat hasn't been open for decades. And when seats like this open up, you will end up seeing just knives out, I would say, is what ends up happening. And I think yesterday we even saw, a little bit of controversy where Pritzker's team and potentially Pritzker himself called Congresswoman Underwood damaged goods. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that happening. Not necessarily, and the Pritzker team and Pritzker himself have denied it, but just like little things like that coming out where everyone's going to be poking at each other. And I think ultimately it's in Pritzker's best interest to try to keep everything at bay as he continues to assess whether he's going to be running for president or not, because he still needs things here to continue running the course under his leadership in a positive way, because ultimately what happens here will impact his presidential run as well.
Yeah, I would say this week, Patrick, they've maybe looked a little bit more like Illinois Republicans in the infighting that's been kind of coming to the surface, especially in the more intensive political discussions that take place in places like our beloved Capitol Facts or Politico, some of the political junkie news outlets. You're starting to see a lot of this bubble up.
That's right. I think we'll continue to see it percolate because there is a frustration. I mean, we look nationally. There's only I think there's one or two states that now have split representation of the U.S. Senate between a Republican and Democrat. So I mean, you're really talking, these are once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunities, and people will fight for them if they believe that they that's where they belong to serve their country and want to. And so the anonymous sources or the unnamed sources that we see a lot in Washington are going to suddenly become Illinois' top political source for the chatter in the back room amongst the Democrats. And we know how that tape goes, and we'll see. I think the other aspect of Governor Pritzker's tour, regardless of national ambitions or anything, is just the overwhelming change in the Democrat Party amongst what they want their elected officials to do. When CNN had a poll out, when Trump's first term, 74% of Democrat and Democrat leaners wanted their members of Congress to work with the Republican majorities and make the country a better place. Today, that's down 24%. So the majority of the Democrat Party and Democrat leaners that CNN polled said they want obstruction. They want opposition. They want these things. And so I think Governor Pritzker is seeing in his base and where he's looking, this is what my constituents want. They want a vocal opposition to this. They're not sure. Now, again, that's not 74% say fight them in the trenches on everything. And so I think that's where you see the Democrat overall national party. They don't know what footing they want. I think Pritzker says a majority of the party I speak to every day, they want a fighter. I'm going to go out and fight for them. There are other national figures that are taking a different approach. And time will tell which one resonates long term with the voters, and what else we see happening relative to these other musical chairs we've been talking about. Are people super aggressive and saying we gotta fight what's going on in Washington, or is there the middle of the road folks that say not every idea that my political opponent has is terrible, and maybe we should implement some of them? Well, time will tell.
Well, tacking back to the good old Chicago corruption. This kind of dovetails nicely into a little occasional segment that I'd like us all to get moving, which is intensely local news. But I found, rather than a hyper-local story, I was distracted by a recent editorial in the Tribune on a more big picture citywide development. And that is the question of aldermanic prerogative. And that's often been, at least among business leaders, that is often viewed as a corrupt practice, even though there's some policy reasons, certainly some long tradition. It's a way that the elected official closest to the people can at least in a clean scenario, respond to whether local residents want a high rise or density or parking or things of that nature. But it's been a source of controversy for business leaders in the Chicagoland area for as long as I've been around, which, as Cianna will tell you, is a long time. So there was a story an editorial in the Tribune recently about a developer from Canada named Ani, and Ani's got a lot of buildings here in Chicago, a lot of inventory, pretty good quality buildings. I actually almost rented one, years ago. They do good stuff, and they recently have proposed a development which is near the old Tribune printing plant and possibly the future home of a Chicago casino. And they have a proposal for a pretty big apartment tower, rental tower, with about 2,450 units, but nearly 500 of them would be affordable. And they've always been pretty good about sprinkling some of that into the other buildings they have in Chicago, and they have some other big high rises. Those other big high rises are the reason. So they have one in Old Town, and it was in the part of Old Town where maybe development was a little hard to generate. They went in there. It was that south end of Old Town, which needed a little investment. They had the guts to build there, and I think that's been pretty successful. They have another one in River North, 369 grand. So they're pretty experienced here in Chicago. Their buildings are built by unions as best as I can understand, but the staff in those buildings are not. And SEIU, the Service Employees Union, wants to organize at the other two existing buildings. And so it is alleged by a number of political figures that that's the holdup for a proposal in River West by the old Tribune printing plant for this high residential tower with affordable units inside. It's held up in the city council. It's been held up for approximately a year. And the Tribune said this. So I guess I just need to connect all the dots here, because sometimes we're also in such insiders that we just assume everybody knows what the hell we're talking about. But because the unions are very strong with this administration and with city council, and especially SEIU, which I'm sure Patrick's got this data somewhere in his data lab, the SEIU union itself was a big funder for Mayor Johnson's campaign. They're using the aldermanic prerogative and some of the final city approval processes to leverage getting Ani to agree to unionize their other buildings in terms of the staff, the day-to-day staff inside those buildings. So the Tribune said, and this has been a long wind-up, what we do know is that it's wrong to attempt to use what should be a relatively routine, uncontroversial action in the city council to extort a private sector employer in this way. Chicago may be a union town, as many in the city council would aver, but it should be open to business to any company willing to invest here, whether it's a union shop or not. So we're a union town. What do you think, Eleni? Who should win here?
I mean, I don't want to say who should win and who should lose, but I think that none of that is surprising. And I think that that's just part of the status quo here. And we know how important unions are in just about anything and everything that happens in Illinois, not just in the city, but statewide. And so, I'm not suggesting that, yes, they should, this Ani should be forced to unionize, but, that's something that I think if you're coming to Illinois and you plan to do business here, that is something that you have to consider before you before you step into the ring.
Should not be shocked.
Exactly.
Any intensely local news that you all are following?
I mean, I
That's,
would. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
no, you first, Eleni.
No, I mean, we want to know what happens in Naperville stays in Naperville. So tell us what's going on in Naperville.
Well, Naperville does not feature aldermanic prerogative, and we do not frequently see permits held up for either collective bargaining agreements or driveway permits, two hallmarks of doing business in the city of Chicago, I suppose. What I think is an interesting story I've been tracking locally is the discussion over the removal of the grocery tax that is occurring. And so you've seen some cities opting in and recurring the tax or re-levying the tax because the state is changing that. And that's really going to be something that's going to impact a lot of local units of government who are not used to the field changing quickly. And it very soon, a lot of governments are going to have their new mayors, their new trustees, their new everything, and that's really going to be a decision that they're going to have to deal with because it's difficult, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out. You could easily say the right thing to do is to maintain the status quo because people have been paying it all along. The other side would say that's a tax increase because the tax is sunsetting and now you're re-levying it. And it's really one of these things where everyone can be idealistic about running and the easy decisions and we're going to do the fun stuff. But it gets real difficult when one of your first acts is your finance team being like, by the way, we need you to vote on what many would call a tax increase. So that's something that the General Assembly gifted to every municipality in the state of Illinois. And there's a bow on it.
It just happened to be, coming up on an election year when that happened, and the state and the governor's administration agreed to lift that local tax on groceries while they were trying to get other tough aspects of their budget through Springfield last year. And the rubber always meets the road in the local communities. Speaking of the rubber meeting the road in local communities, up on the north side, if you take the road up to Cianna, who joins us live now, I understand that you took in our local public radio station, which hosted a live interview with our mayor, Brandon Johnson, and listeners.
Yes, that is correct. I like to say that WBEZ made the hotline bling yesterday. If you get the punch there, it's Drake's hotline bling. But after Mayor Brandon Johnson visited Springfield this past week, he took live calls from WBEZ's Reset and answered questions for an hour. So one of the topics that many community members mentioned was the status of the teen curfews to crack down on the teen takeovers happening downtown. Now, oddly enough, I think that this was gave light to how community members think, and also some agreed with Mayor Johnson's stance, and also some were in disagreement of his stance. And so for Mayor Johnson, he wants to not place those curfews on teens because the data, he said, just doesn't show that it will work. And instead, he wants to create more job opportunities for teens. Another question that was from a small business owner, she talked about a string of robberies happening in Logan Square. Now, the caller asked, like, what was his robbery strategy? How is he going to help businesses with repairs? And so that entire hour of questioning, I think that he handled it in a way that we all know he handles the questions. And one other thing I want to point out is that while one neighborhood was focused on or is focused on rebuilding, there is actually another neighborhood not too far from that is celebrating being car free, and that is Lincoln Square. So neighbors have transformed this car zone into a play zone for community members. But some businesses are also suffering because these deliveries, like food deliveries, just can't be made. So, with the car tariffs taking effect tomorrow, I think everyone may have to learn how to rely on that CTA, public transportation system in the great freaking city in the world, Chicago.
Yeah, and that little experiment, which I think is part of some sidewalk or street construction, if I'm not mistaken, is not far from where producer Grace lives. So maybe you'll see her out there throwing a frisbee around one of these days. All right, it's time for It Sounds Terrible. Can't wait. And why don't we start with the queen of terribleness, Eleni?
So I would say, as we head into the end of session, we've seen that the revenue projections are not as beautiful as some would like us to think. And I think that, quite frankly, the budget and putting the budget together at the end of May is going to be absolutely terrible. And just this week, we saw progressive groups come out with a $6 billion tax proposal package. So it's going to be terrible, folks. Truly, it's going to be really, really bad.
I think we're in payday loan territory to do the state budget. Scar, what's terrible?
What is terrible is I like to teach my kids that it's important to follow the law and all of those things, but I am not looking forward to my sentence when I refuse to play by the styrofoam ban that thankfully the state is enforcing. They're finally getting to the top issues that the citizens have been demanding action on. It's not the pension debt. It's not the fact that they want to tax like wearing glasses or put a tax on talking on the phone. Actually, they already taxed that. It's they gotta ban the styrofoam cups, and we all have to have lukewarm brown water. So, to civil disobedience, my friends.
We apologize to all our environmental friends.
Yes, Cianna, we're sorry that Patrick doesn't like the earth. Anything terrible up by you?
Yeah, the most terrible news I received today is the fact that My Pie is closing after 50 years of business. So that's a pizza place, Chicago deep dish pizzeria. And I'm sad because I love pizza. That's actually one of my favorite foods, but that gives me a reason to go this weekend. So
That is terrible news. The flip side is now you can experiment with other Chicago pizzas, but that is terrible news. That I'm looking forward to the terribleness of presidential candidates appearing on late night talk shows, the late night comedian shows. We saw that already happen with the great governor of the great state of Illinois showing up on Jimmy Kimmel. This is all because of Bill Clinton. So back in 1992, as he was coming up on the Democrat convention, he was the Democrat nominee. It was a pretty competitive primary race he got through. He was a governor of Arkansas, wasn't raising a lot of money. And so he and his campaign, including Paul Begala and James Carville, talked him into going on the Arsenio Hall show, wearing Wayfarer sunglasses and kind of in a mediocre way playing a saxophone with the band. And I believe he played Heartbreak Hotel. And ever since then, we've seen nothing but presidential candidates appearing up on the late night comedian shows. I admit that I see most of those the morning after. I don't quite make it to the monologues, but now it's one more reason to go to bed early because we're going to see presidential candidates flooding the couches of the late night comedians being not really very funny. Am I
You're
right?
onto something, Dennis. They should have to perform a trick. That would actually, if magic trick, something aside from making your hard-earned income disappear. But other than that, if they could do some tricks and musical performances, I might give the candidate a second look.
Well, if you've got a trick that you would like one of our presidential candidates or any of our other hundreds of candidates here in Illinois, you like to see them do a trick, send that suggestion to us. Get in touch with producer Grace. I'm sure she'll put the good contact information in the show notes. So that's Frenemies of the People for another week. Good to see you all. Take care.